Greetings, Eagle family. Welcome to the 8th installment of the virtual village entitled Fathers on the Front Line. My name is Aaron Barnette, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Mentoring Services for the Eagle Academy Foundation. And I'm very honored to fill in for Mr. Banks as the host of this very special episode dedicated to our dads, our fantastic fathers who are on the front line, not only providing guidance for their own children, but for the young men that we serve. And so my hat goes off to you guys so much. And so let me jump right in and introduce our very esteemed panel. First, I will start with Colonel Francis Kairson, who is a U.S. Army veteran, 28 years, 4 months, 7 days served. More importantly, he is an Eagle Academy mentor who gives directly to the young men that we serve. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Colonel. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sherman Brown, founder and CEO of AIMHigh International, who's been a fantastic mentor to so many young men across the Eagle Academy network. And I know you're also the proud father of a gorgeous little girl. Every time I see her pictures online, brother, she brings a smile to my face. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Brother Jamie Harris, who is a 14-year educator from Eagle Bronx, proud father himself, father figure to so many. And it's great to have you guys join us for this fantastic conversation as we uplift our fathers, right? And the fathers across our network. They did an episode of the Virtual Village for Mother's Day. And as we were approaching towards the end of this year, I said we have to do one for the fathers and give them a shout out. So great to have you guys. Great to join us. Thank you so much.
Yes, great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, man. So I'll jump right in, you know, and why don't we kind of start with Jamie, right? And this question is for everybody, right? Because, you know, Father's Day just passed. You know, Juneteenth was Friday. It was a celebratory weekend. So I guess my question for you guys is, despite the current issues that we're facing, we celebrated both Juneteenth and Father's Day this past Sunday. How did you spend your Father's Day, and what did you do to make the day special?
You know, I spent Father's Day, you know, with the family, and you know, it's interesting, B, as we all have to make adjustments in our lives due to COVID, the dramatic change in society in general. I think this really has been an opportunity and a galvanizing opportunity. I think in many ways, although social distancing and isolation has physically separated so many of us, I think it's been an opportunity for us to come together in so many different ways, because I think we've realized that we are interconnected and that we truly do need each other and that we rely on each other. And sometimes we take that for granted. And sometimes we take our family for granted. You know, we're working, we're grinding, you know, it's our days are sometimes so busy, and we don't really take the opportunity to sit back and really appreciate our family and just the little things. And so I really believe that for me, I've taken this opportunity to ask myself, how can I become a better person? How can I improve? How can I strengthen and better myself? And also try to pass those qualities and characteristics on to others, simply because I think it's all about paying it forward. You know, we've been doing this a long time, all of us, and Colonel has rank on us, both in age and his military rank. But I think, you know, it's you know, beginning with someone like Colonel in previous generations, it's an obligation to pay it forward, our success. And so for me, I truly feel blessed to have a wonderful family, you know, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and the extended family. Be you're part of the extended family, and so many others. And so I think when we look around and see how many people who don't have family, how many people who don't have someone that they could lean on a Mother's Day and a Father's Day, I truly think it was a day of appreciation, reflection for me.
Great. Colonel Kairson, how about you, brother? How did you spend your Father's Day?
Well, let me start by saying to everybody, appreciate your families, appreciate being with them, appreciate who they are, and make it a point to spend as much time with them as possible. Because at some point, and I'm at that point now at 73, I have no family left. All of my brothers and sisters, my mother and father, aunts and uncles have all passed. I have one daughter who is in Virginia, and I have one grandson there. And the same is true for my wife. All of her family has passed. She has one niece. So when you get to Father's Day and Mother's Day, there is a void because there used to be 13, 14 people around the table. My father, my two brothers and I, we would kind of form the crux, the center place. We'd go out to dinner or they'd come to my house and I'd have 15, 20 people around the house because all of my brothers and sisters had children. When you fast forward to 2020, look around the table, there's me and there's Barbara because Opal is 400 miles away. What I did this year, and circumstances do things. Number one, of course, the pandemic. But on the other side of the coin, I had three friends who passed this year. Two of them were guys I served with in the military, and one of them was my former pastor. So I kind of adopted the wife of the pastor and their two families, and I called them on Father's Day. Said, hey, listen, I understand this is the first Father's Day where your dad or your husband is not there. And I want you to know I thought about you and I'm checking on y'all. And I'm here if you need me. And I understand what it's like to have that first Father's Day with no parents. So that's what I did. I called the pastor's wife. His name, I don't know if you know him. His name was Thomas P. Grissom. He passed, and I had been in touch with him ever since I went back to my church. And I called another two good friends of mine whose fathers had passed this year. And it was an interesting discussion. We had served together for 20, 25 years in various capacities. And I saw them both, one succumb to, both of them were on dialysis, and you know how that is. And so I went through with them in the hospital and the passing on both of them. One of them, I was at the hospital, and 15 minutes after I left, he passed. The other one, I was there on Saturday, and Tuesday he passed. And I played a role in both their funerals. And one of them, who's a general officer from the New York Army National Guard, who's going to be buried at Arlington later this year. So that's what I did to kind of make the day special, because the reality is, I'm finding out that one of the things, and I encourage all of you to understand, one of the things that happens when you get older is people begin to leave you. And you wake up one morning and you are it, if you're lucky. And suddenly a lot of the things that you did, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, Easter, Father's Day, Mother's Day, are kind of lonely days because without people, they're not the same. So that's what I did. And again, I urge all of you, make the best of your time with your parents and family. Make the best of time with the people that are close to you, because unfortunately, whether you like it or not, one day you're going to wake up and you will be the sole representative, and try to fill in that time. Everybody I know that's a dad, I called them on Father's Day. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, no, powerful stuff, Colonel. And just even hearing you say that made me feel like some of the decisions that I made over this weekend to celebrate Juneteenth and as well as Father's Day, I may have made the right decision in that sense, because I try to make an effort as much as possible, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now and watching the death of so many Black men. And many of these men were fathers as well. So I try to spend most of my time in my life with the people who will cry the most after my funeral. So I'm thinking about my daughter. I'm thinking about, my wife. I'm thinking about my immediate family and trying to spend as much time with them. So during Juneteenth as well as Father's Day, I spend a lot of time educating, but also celebrating. and then participating as well. So what I mean by that is, one, I wanted to celebrate with my daughter, you know, early morning Father's Day. I'm talking about actually the day before Father's Day, we spent a lot of time together. She got me this personalized book. Her and her mother, you know, went and did their plans and had this personalized book, which made me feel so good. It actually has an avatar or the images of me and my daughter in the book. And it says from Soleil, right, to Daddy. And, you know, I read that book with her. And as we were doing that, just enjoying that moment. But immediately after I finished that, 3 o'clock in the morning, I was on the way to Washington, D.C. So I went with the Dad Gang, which is an organization that celebrates Black fathers. And I was a speaker at the event, the March on Dads, March of Dads. And we marched in Washington, D.C., starting from the African American Museum, going up straight to the White House, to Black Lives Matter Plaza, where we were out there, you know, making sure that they understand that Black dads matter, right? That we have an essential role that we play here. So right after I left, you know, I went there to D.C., we marched, you know, we let our voices be heard, and we, you know, connected with about 300 to 400 brothers out there. It was an awesome, awesome event. And as soon as the event was done, I just drove back to get back with the family. And then, you know, we just spent the night, you know, going over the book again. And after reading the book again, we just were talking, and I was educating my daughter about what was going on. Because a few days before that, we had Juneteenth. And, you know, I, as a young man, never really heard about Juneteenth when I was younger. Growing up in the school system, never hearing about Juneteenth. So I wanted to make sure that I was educating my daughter about it. And I was actually able to speak at another event on Juneteenth where I was with Assemblyman Carl Hasty, the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, as well as Borough President Ruben Diaz. And we spoke for that event, and we had a big celebration out there as well. So I spent a lot of time celebrating, but also educating, teaching my daughter what these things mean and why they matter. And, you know, and then spending time with them, with the family, you know, because again, I want to spend most of my time in my life with the people who will cry the most after my funeral. Not the ones who will cry just for the moment, but those who will have the long-term impact and effects. And that's my daughter, my wife, my immediate family.
Hey, B, can I just add something? Just something that both Colonel and Sherman said that just really resonated. You know, you and I spoke, I think it was yesterday, the day before, and, you know, we were both disturbed by what took place in Chicago over Father's Day weekend. The number of shootings and killings in the Black community, including 5 children that were killed. And, you know, I juxtapose that with the multiracial, multi-generational global protests for racial justice that are taking place. And one of the things that I've talked about in the different appearances that I've made is the beauty of seeing so many brothers of all different ages, all different generations, taking their children out to the protest to be a part of history. And I spoke to a brother and I asked him the same question. I said, you know, how was your Father's Day? And he said, yeah, man, I took my son and daughter to a protest. And I thought that was deep, you know, because when we think back through the history, we think about Martin Luther King and the March on Washington and so many protests, and how many people today say, you know what, I was there. My father took me, my mother took me. And it's interesting because 20, 30 years from now, so many of the children will be able to say that their fathers and mothers also, but, you know, we're certainly representing and celebrating fathers, how the fathers took them to the protest to be part of history, to enact change, and also show them that they have agency. And so to hear Sherman do what he did, and Colonel, your story is very moving, and you're absolutely right, because the older you get, you do lose family, and you have to cherish and appreciate your family. So I think, you know, when you juxtapose those two, I think that we have so much good and so many people looking to make positive change and looking to be great fathers that in some ways, you know, it negates and mitigates some of the things that we still see, unfortunately, taking place in our community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting because, you know, even my own 2 children who, you know, you guys know, the years go by so fast. My daughter's 16 now, my son is 22, and because of the COVID crisis, I haven't necessarily been able to see them as much as I'd like, right? So that time is so critical, and to combine it with the social justice and what's going on around the country is critical, and it's important, right? So I salute all you brothers for being able to balance both, right? Give the love and attention to your families that you need, but also understand that our community needs us, and to step up and be on the front lines as an example to our children and even those who we are not biologically connected to. as you guys all know. So with that being said, right, all of the protests that are going around, and Colonel, I want to start with you with this question, right, being the elder statesman of the group and really just having a lifelong worth of service, right, and commitment to your community. We as Black and brown men find ourselves the victims of police misconduct and mistreatment more than any other group. And this is to the entire group, but again, I want to start with you, Colonel. How do you feel about the recent protests around the country and the globe? And do you think this is a turning point of change for us as a people? And if so, why? Or why not?
Well, let me start by saying I've been down this road before. I went to Howard in 1963, and I was there through Kennedy's assassination. I was there through the March on Washington. More importantly, I was there when Dr. King was assassinated. And it was a very traumatic period for me because I'm a young Black man, and I'm the first kid in my family to go to college, and I'm in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and there are things going on. And you wake up one morning and on the radio, the guy says, hey, they just assassinated Dr. King. And in the same breath, James Brown comes on the radio and says, my brothers and sisters, stay peaceful and remember him. In the next breath, which is one of those things that you think about later on, was tactical blunder. The mayor of District of Columbia, because the District of Columbia does not have a significant police force like we do in New York, because it's a territory. It's not a state or a city, official city. So the mayor went on, and out of concern for life and limb, he said, I'm instructing the police officers and law enforcement not to apprehend anyone who is not posing a threat to life and limb. The effect of that was basically people took to the streets looting. And I was shocked that here my brothers and sisters, because I lived in Northwest Washington, Howard's in Northwest Washington. Here my brothers and sisters taking shopping carts out of the supermarket and then filling it up with food and going down the street and breaking in stores, stealing liquor and clothes and everything in the name of a guy who talked about nonviolence and the betterment of the race. Okay, and I remember one incident which was sad. There used to, I don't know if you know anything about DC, but back in the day there used to be a Jaguar MG dealership on the corner of Rhode Island Avenue and George Avenue. The brothers broke in the showroom and stole the cars. Okay, now this is, if you think about it, first place, there's no plates, no registration, but more importantly, because of fire regulations, there's only a certain amount of fuel that you can have in a car in a dealership, just enough to get it around. So you can imagine 10, 15 blocks from the dealership, all over the Northwest are the cars that they stole, because they ran out of gas. The 82nd Airborne showed up, and it was like in the movies where you see the gun jeeps with the machine gun in the back, except this one had real bullets in it. And they established a curfew, and they built a holding pen next to the DC Armory because the curfew was 4 o'clock. And if you were on the street after 4 o'clock and you did not have an official letter from an employer or something, you were detained. Okay? I remember that as I looked at what happened after the death of Brother Floyd. And it seemed like deja vu all over again. People were looting and burning and everything, burning down stores. Washington never recovered from that. There are places in Northwest Washington now that are still empty. A lot of the businesses on 14th Street and other places closed up, took the insurance, and disappeared. A lot of college students and people in the community were out of work and had no place to buy services and goods. But unfortunately, the other thing that I notice as I get older is that for some reason in this particular country, we have to have something traumatic happen before we stand up and take notice. So if you look at history, they'll tell you what, the murder of Emmett Till and his mother having the foresight to say, I want people to see what they did to my son. We're gonna have a funeral, the casket open. They say that started the civil rights movement. The murder of Dr. King pushed us into the freedom rides and stuff that we saw in 68, 69, and 70. So it appears that we are back to that particular discussion that says something really ugly and bad has to happen before people take notice. I saw more white people in the street in some of the cities than you saw black folks. Okay? Yes, the byproduct wasn't good. The looting wasn't good, but we understood that there's the problem with this time in the world is there are a lot of devious people around who are willing to expand on and take advantage of a situation. So if you looked around, I remember there was a discussion where there was a guy in the street, I don't know if you saw this, in Milwaukee, and you could not ascertain who he was. He had an umbrella, he had on a gas mask, and he had a hood up. And when they caught up with him, he was breaking glass windows with a hammer. And some brothers that passed him said, "What are you doing?" Right? And he said something and he ran off. Now, in my mind, part of the issue that came up was, I don't know who these people really were. Do I think there were some brothers and sisters misguided? Absolutely. There was one young lady that had on a Zeta Phi Beta t-shirt. I saw, but that happens. It happened in 68. We had Howard students who decided that this was a chance to fill out their stocks, all right? And I remember one incident, there was a picture of somebody trying to put a console TV in a Volkswagen. And it had a Howard sticker on the back. And the president at that time, he went crazy trying to find out who that was. But the thing I think is significant is that it seems as though in this country, it takes something truly magnanimous or significant that kind of get us back on the road. We thought we were on the road after King. We thought we were on the road after Emmett Till. We thought we were on the road after a lot of other things, the King Monument, the museum dedicated to the lynchings in Alabama. We really thought we were on that road, but apparently we aren't. The other thing that I thought about, we understand that we can't sit back and let somebody else do it. Okay, everybody we've listened to all the things with Rodney King. We listened to the gentleman in Staten Island, Garner. We kind of looked and saw and were unhappy, but we didn't do much after that. So now we're faced again, but this time it's in threes. And even the blind folks, as they say, Ray Charles could see, we need to step up. And what happens when we don't? Because we can't rely on the police. You know, I was brought up in Harlem. I never saw a cop pull a gun in anger, but I knew the cops and they knew me, right? And when the beat cop came along, and those of you who lived in black neighborhoods, he said, "Okay, time for y'all to be in the house." He had to draw that gun. He just tapped that stick on the sidewalk. It's time for y'all to be in the house. You don't have to call your mother. And you know they knew where we lived, right? And we do what we do. So I never saw a cop draw a gun in anger. But I understand times have changed, and I just hope that this momentum doesn't get caught up in, you know, the summer beach trips and, gee, we can get back out and eat a piece of steak, and we forget what's happening in this country, because if we do, we're going to be right back. And unfortunately, it seems like history says for us to make a headway, something bad has to happen to one of us. Okay? That's a terrible discussion. Somebody got to die. Somebody got to really be hurt. Somebody got to almost be killed before we go, okay, we need to step up. So that's my concern now. We've had the same, 68, 2020. different people, but very much the same. We moved ahead at 68. I hope we can move ahead now. My concern is that we'll get caught up in the beach weather and forget what we got to do, because it isn't over. It's just beginning. And so that's my concern, that we will forget by November. The weather will change, man. I'm busy. I'm too busy to vote, man. My vote don't matter. Or I'm too busy to pay attention to what the police are doing because they ain't bothering me. All right? And I understand. I got to tell you, and I'll close with this. I realize, how do you realize what sometimes something has to happen to you? So, I'm born and raised in Harlem. I travel around a bit. I see the cops, but I don't really see them, because usually you look at the old man and I got a special plate, and I would have my hat that says U.S. Army. So I was coming home from the Bronx on 207th Street and Dyckman Avenue, broad daylight. Cop pulls up behind me. All I'm doing is driving down the street. Two young white cops get out. I give them my, as I do, because I'm always prepared. I have my registration in the door handle. I have my registration and I have my driver's license in the door handle. My registration in my hand, on the dashboard. Takes my stuff. He looks at it, goes back to the car, comes back, and he says, I have one of those brackets that says for my fraternity and my wife's sorority. I've had that bracket for 5-10 years, right? Or 6-7 years, let's put it that way. He says to me, your bracket is illegal. So I'm like, what are you talking about? How can the bracket be illegal and I've had it for 4 or 5 years? Well, I understood it was a swindle. He was hoping to find something on the old man, but I was ahead of him. I had all my stuff out and there was nothing wrong with the car. And so instead of just saying, have a good day, sir, sorry to bother you, he went through the thing about your license plate bracket is illegal. Now, I came on home, but coming home, the thought came to me very succinctly. This is what the real world is about. You need to be concerned and doing something about this. There was no reason to pull you over. And if you had overreacted, you'd be in jail. So that was my come to Jesus moment. But like I said, I'm concerned that we would forget, we will move on, and the demons are out there. And if we don't make this work, we're gonna be another one of these 10 years from now and say, oh man, they killed so-and-so, and we need to protest again. That can't happen.
But I tell you, Colonel, that I agree with everything you're saying, but the energy for this one seems to be a little bit different. I'm not sure if it's the season, because we're fresh off of COVID and we kind of have everybody's attention and the world is just, their eyes are directly on it. But it does seem like there's something different, and it seems like there's a change that's coming about. But Brother Harris, you're there, Eagle Bronx, and even Sherman, you're working with the young men of Eagle Harlem. What are the young people that you're talking with? What are they saying in their views in regards to the protests around the country and just the need for change at this time?
It's really inspiring and quite amazing to hear when we have our virtual town halls, to hear 6th graders and 7th graders, kids who are 11 and 12, be able to clearly articulate what these protests are about, what these protests mean to them, how through their lens, how they view the protest. And that's why I do agree with you, Brother Barnette, in that I think this is, and we've heard this term quite often over the last month or so, I think this is a movement and not a moment. I do think that this, and history is a continuum. And so when you look at what we were protesting and fighting for, going back to the early, 20th century, and then the mid 20th century, and now so many of the same issues. You know, we fought for voting rights, but yet now we're fighting to stop voter suppression. You know, so it's the same issue. And so I think that the young people see that for them, this is a time where they can define their future. There's a level of, I think young people are looking at it and saying, well, we're being told, go to school, get an education, to do all the things that are necessary to be successful. And then they find that their path to success, and when I say success, I mean economic success in many ways, you know, it is limited because, as you said, of the systematic racism and the systemic racism, and they're two distinct institutions. And so I think young people are really energized. And we talk about the millennials, but it's the Generation Z, the Zoomers, those who are between 5 and 25, who are really out there. And I'm encouraged. And I think young people have an energy. I think there's a dynamic that really is going to move the needle legislatively. And we've already seen changes in police reform and how policing is being conducted around the country, right here in New York State, due to legislation. And I think the next frontier is economics, you know, income inequality. And I think young people see that during this COVID virus, from March 18th until now, the net worth of billionaires in the United States collectively has increased 565 billion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to wrap your head around that. $565 billion, the net worth of billionaires increased since this country has closed due to the pandemic. Conversely, 46 million people have filed for unemployment. And many of these people are highly educated, highly skilled people who lost their jobs due to no fault of their own, but yet they see billionaires getting wealthier. And so I think young people are just tired. And I do think that in any movement, you do have to have elders to provide guidance. But I think the young people are really pushing this movement. They are fueling this movement. And I'm really encouraged. And again, to listen to some of the young people at Eagle Bronx talk about how they view the protest, what it means to them, what it means to their future, it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Brother Browne, just wanted to, and I know you're going to chime in your comments, if you could just even expand a little bit on, because I know Brother Harris talked about the youth at Eagle Bronx, and you were just down in the march down in DC. I know you did some work last week with some men in suits protesting against what's been going on. If you could just speak a little bit about what you've seen fathers and men in the roles that they've stepped up in regards to these protests. I don't know if you were going to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, definitely want to touch on that. I want to say to Mr. Harris's point, I do see a level of high energy. And I think that one of the reasons you see that level of high energy is that many of them haven't been beat down by the experiences of the past, right? So, you know, they may have heard about it, right? Like, you know, the civil rights movement and those things, but now they see it as, well, this is our moment, right? Like, you know, it's easy to say what I would have done if I was there back then, but now they're like, well, look, we have the chance right now to be able to do it. So I've been heavily engaged on the street and even bringing the young people out there with me just so that they could experience what it's like on the ground, of course, socially distancing and making sure we do the right things. But when we're out there, men have the men who I've been out there with have seen it as even more important to be there and to educate at the same time while we're there. So it's not just we're out there marching, you know, people are hyped, people are excited, people are screaming Black Lives Matter. There's education that's going on in the moment that seems like the men who are actually out there feel like a sense of obligation that this time has to be different. I watched a video that went viral of a young man speaking to a 16-year-old, and he was telling the young man, he was like, look, you guys have to do it differently because we've done this in the past, right? And the people before us have done it, and we still have these outcomes. And he pleaded with him and he said, we don't want it to be the same. So you, as a young person, as a 16-year-old, you know, has to do it different. And what has happened is when we're out there with these young men right now, that's what we're feeling. So I think the fathers and the men who are out there feel obligated to now teach and mentor in the movement, right? Not just be the movement, but mentoring the movement. And I think the young people have a level of enthusiasm because they're like, this is our time. This is our chance. And, you know, sometimes when you're dealing with young people feel like they know, like they already know. And that's what's emboldening them even more now. Like I know you guys couldn't get it right we have the chance to do it. We're going to go out there and get it done. So I think they're pumped. Like I said, when I went out with the men, we went with Black business owners, right? We had about 150 men out there. Then we, did another event in the Bronx where we were with young people. And we had about 150 young people there with adults. And then we went for the dad gang. And when we went down to Washington, D.C., you have the men, but you also have the children there. So there's a lot of mentoring happening in the movement. And that's why, in addition to that, this is a generation that has grown up with a level of acceptance, right? Whether it's the LGBT, Q community, they've accepted. So when they even see more of the Caucasians, right, being out there as well, they embrace that as well. And they're like, look, this is a full movement. We're all in this together. Whereas sometimes I talk with some folks and they feel like when they look at, Caucasians being there, some of them have a problem with it. I think what happens is the young people we've been out there with have embraced it. Like, look, all of us, and they're here together with us. Let's go. So I think the fire is, it's a spark. And when you just think about some of the reforms that have passed recently, right? I think it's showing us that this spark, right, is igniting a fire and it's doing something. And I think like what the Colonel said is very important, that we got to keep the momentum. We got to keep the momentum, because when I look at the laws that were passed in New York State and around, in different countries, right? I say if they could have done it in the last 2 weeks, right, or 3 weeks since George Floyd passed away, it means they could have done it 2 years or 3 years ago. The difference is that back then, right, it wasn't about political skill, it was about political will. And there wasn't a will of the masses to say, hey, you know what, we want to accept this. So now you get to a point where you have this movement, the populace is moving, the population is moving towards it. And now elected leaders are like, look, we got to pass these policies right here, right now. And I think the young people seeing that movement makes them feel like they're making the difference as well. And I think that's what's going to build more momentum.
Absolutely. Let me just add to that. And that's what we talk about, having agency. I think the young people see, Brother Sherman, and it's a great point, that they have agency. They see that their voices are being heard. A lot of times, a lot of movements begin organically, and then there's the organization and mobilization, but there's really no clear and defined platform. There's no clear demands. This is what we're demanding. In this movement, we were demanding, and when I say we, I'm not talking about people of color, because this is, again, a multiracial movement, but this is about police brutality against primarily Black men and women. And so we demand police reform. We demand how police are dealing with our community, how they're policing our community. And as you said, Sherman, young people see that their voices were heard because we've already seen police reform around this country legislatively. And that's what's critical. I think young people are saying, okay, we've seen protests before, but what has come out of it? Has there been anything actionable? In this instance, already, and this is still a young protest. We look today, there are people still in the streets around the country, so this is not ending. But there has been changes. And I think that is inspiring and motivating young people to say that, well, let's try to enact and really facilitate more change. We're getting police reform, but that's not enough. So I don't think this is going to stop. And as Brother Sherman said, we continue to mentor, we continue to teach within the context of continuing to have definitive action and definitive policies that are impacting for the better our communities.
And the coverage is also different and more significant and has done a lot to increase. You can turn on the TV and you can see people in Oakland, California, you can see them in Washington, D.C., you can see them all over the country and all over the world involved in these protests. Strength in numbers. We all like to be associated with something that has a mission and a need. And thanks to media, we sure see the mission and the need, because you can't just say, well, it's only in New York or it's only in DC. There are people in France, England, Germany, all over this country. We have people who, in fact, have stood up and marched and said, hey, this isn't going to work anymore. That brings about a lot of stuff. As you said, we've seen our elected officials do more in 2 weeks than some have done in 2 years. Okay? We've seen more input, we've seen more comment, we've seen more elected officials coming out because they don't want to get left behind. Okay? So that's important. But again, like everything else, what does the guy say? Memory is short, especially when you get to be my age. we have to continue to reinforce where we're at and where we want to be. And this is just the beginning, not the middle of the end. This is just the beginning. And at least this is go through till November the 3rd when we vote. And that's real. And even after that, because we're not what they say, you can legislate laws, but you can't legislate minds. We have a lot of people in this country who have, it doesn't matter who what the laws are, they have their own discussion about how they should act. And many of them in blue uniforms, right? So, I mean, the callousness of what you saw when that man, when they knocked that white man over in Buffalo, the 75-year-old guy, okay? They knocked him over, then they lied about it, and then when you look at it, one of the other officers comes up and tries to help the guy up, and another officer says, leave him alone. And then a couple of days later, after they, arrested those guys, and they got out on bail, there were police officers and their families outside the courthouse clapping and applauding. So that tells me this ain't a one-nighter. This is on the long haul, because we got a lot of people in this country that what they say, 35 million people voted for Trump. Okay, that's scary. Which means you got 35 million people in this country who don't have a concern for folks of color, who don't have a concern for brown and black, who don't have a concern for our future, who only see one thing, and that's what's in it for me. That's a scary thought.
It was 15 million more than that, brother Colonel, who voted for him. And just quickly, B, let me just add on to something Colonel said is a very interesting point. Just 20, 30 years ago, and even 20 years ago in this country, mass media consisted of print journalism, radio, and television. Very few major media outlets were owned by people of color, were owned by black folks. And so we didn't control the message, right? And so because it was corporate controlled, the message was sanitized. Well, these young people now are consuming their information through social media. And so social media is not controlled by corporate interests who are putting out disinformation. We know there's a lot of disinformation on social media, but nonetheless, social media is where young people are getting their information and sharing information. So social media has been critical in helping to mobilize, galvanize, and get young people out, getting them to really see truthfully what is taking place. And so much of what is happening, they can relate to because they've been victims, of malfeasance in terms of policing, and brutality. So many young men that, we have mentored over the years that we know who are in jail. B, how many guys do we know coming through Eagle Bronx who are now in prison, or who have been in some ways victims of the criminal justice system? And so I think today, because of social media and having very unfiltered information, young people really now are able to understand from a historical perspective how this impacts them and how the messaging is critical, and it's no longer being controlled by and large by corporate interests because of social media.
Mm-hmm. And I tell you, and again, all excellent points. And again, just the need to mentor the young people, right, and show them, right, the past sacrifices and the things that those before them went through, right, just so that they understand the duty that they have. And I think what it also does is it changes the narrative, right? A lot of times, right, you turn on the news and it's interesting, right, because they call those of another skin tone, right, the allies. Seems like you see more allies on the television screen than you do brothers, right? So I think it's important that we lift that up, that there are brothers out there on the front lines that are contesting what's going on out there with the police and just continuing to push. So just to shift really quick, there's been a lot going on the past few months, right? I know we're dealing with the police protests, but prior to that, we have this COVID crisis, right? And, young people are just adjusting to virtual learning. And so, Brother Harris, just a question for you as an Eagle educator. How have you dealt with the transition to using a virtual platform? And what tips would you have for dads out there listening so that they can be more engaged and support their children through this process over the summer and possibly the fall? Because as you know, when we come back in the fall, there's a very high chance that all of the students won't be back. So what advice would you give to the dads out there so that they can be more engaged with their children during this process?
I think first and foremost, from a societal perspective, I think people really don't know, because I guess it's pretty much a given for most people that you have broadband, that you have internet, that you have access to technology, a laptop, a computer, a desktop. But in the Black community, underserved communities, Black and Latino communities, the digital divide is still a major impediment to us being engaged on a global level, because again, digitally, it's all about global connectivity. And so, in the Bronx, long ago, we said, it's about being globally conscious. And so the digital divide has had a great impact. And one of the things that certainly was illuminated for me during this pandemic is how many of our young people don't have the necessary tools, technology to engage in remote learning. And that's been one of the issues. I think we've done a great job of reaching out to all the students who have not had the proper technology in order to provide them with that technology. But still, that has been an issue. I think for fathers, I think this is a perfect opportunity to become more engaged with their children, develop a deeper and closer relationship, because obviously socializing and that social connection is so important for young people, being with their friends every day. And that has had really a negative psychological impact on so many of our kids. That's been a big adjustment for them, the isolation. So I think as a father, it's getting closer to your child from a standpoint of having them connect with their friends, even if it's virtually. You being more engaged, you sitting down and helping them with their schoolwork. When they have, the Zoom and Google, Teams, and they're having these face-to-face with their teachers, well, you join. If you're not going to parent-teachers, and I'm one of those fathers, and my wife, we go to all the parent-teachers, meetings, but I know a lot of times parents can't. So now this is an opportunity to really engage more with the teachers. And so I think that for most of us, it's a huge adjustment. It's been a huge adjustment. Nevertheless, it's always an opportunity. So we always look at, tragedy or something that, we may view as being a negative, event. And we turn that into an opportunity, again, to improve, to get better, and to really develop a greater and closer relationship with our children.
Yeah, that's a great point. The line from Invictus, right? Under the bludgeonings of chance. And I've said to so many young people that this COVID crisis that we've been dealing with is a bludgeoning of chance. We had no control over it. But the question you got to ask yourself is, what is the blessing of choice that you're going to take out of it, right? And, like you said, as dads, the 100 Black men, right, the founders of Eagle, right, they have this saying, young people will be what they see. And so if we want our children to be confident in these uncertain times, we have to communicate with them. We have to sit down with them. We have to, like you said, connect with the teachers at the school. And take it a step even further, once the COVID crisis is over, right, that's your cue to even ramp it up even more, right? Don't just connect with them virtually. Go to the school. Go to those PA meetings. Be as actively involved as you can. That way your kids understand the importance of school. So thank you for that. Brother Sherman, let me ask you, as it relates to the COVID crisis, I know you said you work with the young men from Eagle Harlem. They have their first graduating class this year, right? Want to give big shout out to those guys. They got their first ceremony on Saturday. But there's been a tremendous amount of loss associated with this crisis, right? The immeasurable amounts of death that our young men have had to deal with family members. But then when you just talk about just the things that have been stripped of them, just rites of passage wise, right? They're not going to experience walking across the stage. They're not going to experience their prom. They're not going to experience the yearbook signing, right? And so you as an individual that works with so many young men, hundreds of young men, both inside and outside of Eagle, what have you shared with the young men just in terms of keeping them motivated, keeping them encouraged in this period of loss, pain, and confusion?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been talking with the young men about, right, is just reflecting on who they were before the crisis. reflecting on who they were before the crisis. And the reason why it's so important, right, is because even when I talk to young men and some of the young men in Eagle, and when they said, oh, we're not going to be able to have prom, we're not going to be able to have this, oh, we can't get back together with our friends. I said, you remember there was a point in time where school was going on regularly, right? And while school was going on regularly, you would say things like, yo, I'm tired of being in this school, right? Like, I'm just ready to, I can't wait to get out of here. And the minute now that opportunity gets taken away from you, where it wasn't a choice of yours now you say, I want it back. So the first thing I told the young people, reflect on who you were before. Were you somebody who was as appreciative as you should have been? And if not, this is the time now to start to recognize you need to appreciate everything you have as opposed to complaining about what you don't have, right? So I begin by telling the young man, reflect on who you were. After you do the reflection and you take a thorough and honest self-assessment, the next thing to do after that is to refocus, right? Like redirect that energy. Now that we have this situation, it is what it is. What could you do right now? What do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on the things that you can't get done? Or do you want to focus on who you could become in this moment? This is an opportunity for you to prove the most important life formula ever. I tell them that E plus R equals O. There are events that happen, but your response will determine the outcome. So COVID-19 event, how will you respond? Because you have the ability to control how you respond to this, right? And the outcome that you get is going to be based on how you respond to this situation. So E plus R equals O. And once I get them into that, refocusing your energy into how you want to respond. What do you want to get out of this, right? Like if we all have to go through this, it's better that you leave out of the crisis with more than you came in with. And that might be, I need to develop new skills. That might be, I need to develop new relationships. What are the opportunities? Nakai Santiago was on your show a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And Nakai Santiago during this time has elevated, right? Has elevated his podcast just in terms of the content he's creating, the things that he's learning. Now he's learning video editing, right? So now he's going to come out of here with more skills than he came in. But he was one of those who said, I'm going to embrace that philosophy of event plus response will determine outcome. My response is going to be to learn as much as I can in this downtime. I'm going to do what I need to do with school because he's graduating, right? He's getting ready to go to college. But in the meantime, I'm going to develop some skills there. The third part, after you do sort of the reflection and the refocus, is to then restructure. What do you want now moving forward to look like? If this is the new world, right, where we're going to be online more, how are you going to structure yourself in the areas of faith, family, fitness, finances, fun, friends, fulfillment? Those 7 foundational pillars of our existence. So now it's time to restructure because what you thought you knew has changed, which is not a problem because change is inevitable. Your growth, though, is optional. It's up to you if you want to grow and if you're going to make that happen. So now is the time to restructure yourself in all of those areas and start thinking about things a little differently. And what we found is that the young men who have actually embraced those concepts, a lot of them feel like now I'm on a trajectory. One of the young men, Joshua, who was on, he called me. He said, you know what, Sherman, I really want to get into speaking more. Could you help me in that area, right? Sent him over some documents so that he could start looking at it and structuring his message. Again, that's not something he had to do in school. It wasn't required there, but these are additional skills that they're going to now take on. And those skills will pay the bills for them wherever they go after this. So again, it's about that reflection, that refocus, and then that restructure. And I find that many of the young men who have had that guidance to get some of that from someone, in this case, I'm mentoring them, members of the AIMHigh team, I'm mentoring them, sharing that with them. It's been very helpful. And that's why it's important for us as men and even as fathers, as you know, our brother Harris alluded to earlier, fathers need to get involved and start making those connections now, because as a matter of fact, when you guys are doing it together, right, it builds a stronger bond because all of us, the thing that the crisis did is it equalized and it normalized it for family households. I truly believe that everyone was in the same storm. Not everyone was on the same boat. Some boats had it harder than others. But the one thing it did for everyone is that if you were in a household with someone, you could take time and say, look, let's figure this out together. And you know, when you go through something together with someone, usually there's a stronger bond that's built, especially when you get out on the other side, because you remember what we went through and how we were able to get out of it.
I mean, can I just quickly make this point, Colonel, very quickly? You know, Sherman, you made some amazing observations. And, you know, but we're all sports fans, and most of our students and most of the young men are sports fans. So I try to use the analogy. I tell them, I said, look at what's happening with the NBA, right? These guys are famous. These guys are wealthy. and they still have fear because there's an uncertainty for them as well, right? They can't even come to a consensus of whether they're going to play or whether they're not going to play. Should they play or should they sit out because of what's taking place in the country right now in terms of the protest? And so you have some of the wealthiest, smartest, most accomplished men in the world who can't come to a consensus. So I tell them that this is normal. You know, these times are, as you said, Barnette, the bludgeon and the chance. These are circumstances that are unprecedented. So it's okay to have that feeling of uncertainty and fear. There would be a problem. I'd be concerned if you didn't. If you didn't have a fear and uncertainty, that would be a concern, because that would show that there's this indifference and apathy, and that's what we don't want them to have. We don't want them to be indifferent and apathetic. We want them to have that emotion, no matter what that emotion is. But as Brother Sherman said, how are you going to come out on that other side, which is critical in using that time? So I can't even say it any better than what you said, Brother Sherman. Use this to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to improve on other skills. I'm going to do a self-assessment, a self-reflection, even as adults. Where was I before COVID, and what am I going to be after this is over?
Yeah, absolutely. Colonel, you wanted to add something?
I think one of the other things that I find that we have to take pause on, life is a strange ball of wax, and we all get caught up in life. Okay, I gotta get up, I gotta go out, I gotta go to work, I gotta rush over here, rush over there, rush home, fall asleep, get up. We get caught up in life. And I truly believe that there are times in life when forces beyond my control step in and say, whoa, slow down, pay attention, and learn and exchange. So we caught up on iPod, P-pod, some pod, no pod. We can go to the moon and we can change stuff and 4-minute miles and 200-mile-an-hour cars, and marijuana is legal now, right? And we're all caught up, man, I got to make another $1. Man, I'm getting that new car. And unfortunately, we're all in the same boat. And we kind of missed a lot of stuff, all right? So for dads, I say this is an opportunity for you to officially and legally slow down and spend some time with your family and learn about your children. Because you know, and Aaron will tell you this, a lot of times when kids get in trouble, we talk to the parents, what's the first thing they say? I didn't know he was into that. I didn't know she was involved in that. I didn't know that's who their friends were. I didn't know that's what he was doing when he left here. And it's like, oh man, what's going on, right? What time did your son come in last night? I don't know, I was asleep. Well, I wasn't home. So this has been, to me, the system settling down, saying, okay, let's slow down, let's regroup, and let's pay attention to what's really, really important. Because we found out we didn't have to go out, we didn't have to go anywhere, we couldn't go to school, we couldn't go to work, we were afraid of getting sick. And those are all things that we kind of had to put on the back burner now. Somebody we know got sick. And you might think you're a pretty healthy guy, you think your family is, but I don't know anybody that doesn't know somebody who got sick. And most of the time it was scary because it wasn't like somebody shot somebody. It was like I was standing up breathing. Next thing I know, I'm in an incubator, trying to get the point. So I think that's part of the discussion that we have to have, that periodically we kind of need to self-evaluate and slow down and come together. Father's Day is probably that event, Father's Day, Mother's Day. But I think we need to do that all, continuously. And out of this come and say, at some point on a predetermined basis, hey, listen, let's get together, let's sit down in the living room, let's turn everything off, put them phones down, and let's look at where we are and what we're doing. And oh, by the way, who are your friends? What do you do when you're not here? What happens between 3 and 6 when I don't see you at school? Where was you last, the other week ago, you was a little late getting in the house. Where was you? And who are your friends? My mother can tell you who my friends were, and she can tell me who I didn't need to talk to. What would she say? I don't like him. He's too fast for you. He'll get you in trouble. And you go to school and say, man, here's the truth. I'm done business. Okay? We can hang out in school. That's it. I think we need to do that. And in terms of education, I always say that education is a triangle. And a triangle is parents, students, and teachers and administrators. And as you know, if it's not closed on all three sides, it's not a triangle. That's what we need to think about.
And you know something, B? I think that the confluence of COVID and the racial justice protests that are taking place globally has really compelled people to be empathetic. And I think empathy has been one of the prevailing emotions that we've seen, because now, no matter how much money you have, and COVID has obviously disproportionately impacted Black and Latino communities, but look how many people that are wealthy have contracted COVID. Mm-hmm. So they're not immune to it. So I think in some ways, the playing field has been leveled in terms of people now seeing that even though I have wealth and status and station in life, I'm still not immune to catching this. And I have, as Colonel said, someone that I know, a friend or a brother or a family member who has passed away. And when you look at the racial justice protests, they see people again who, we know how many athletes have talked about their experiences getting pulled over, how many entertainers, wealthy, who have been harassed by cops. And so I think the level of empathy now, I think that has transcended, race, culture, gender, is something that we may have never seen in our history, because we see these are issues that are impacting so many. And I just want to make this last point when I say empathy. I had a parent, and she's relatively young, she's in her 30s, who she's always been very responsive to me. And so throughout the, the course of remote learning, I was calling her, no response. So finally I spoke to her last week, and she said, "Oh, Mr. Harris, I'm so sorry." I said, "Yeah, I was getting concerned." And then she told me that she worked in the doctor's office and she contracted COVID. And her oldest son, who's 17, who's a high school senior, he contracted COVID. Now, our student, who's a freshman in high school, he didn't contract COVID. But she said to me, for him to see me and his older brother go through this, it was terrifying, And so I was extremely empathetic, because I said, listen, how can you expect a young man to focus on schoolwork and to be engaged every day when he's watching his mother and his older brother deal with COVID, and every day seeing people dying from COVID and not knowing what the outcome for his brother and his mother will be? And so I do think that it's compelled all of us, me certainly, to be more empathetic and understanding that the circumstances that people have been put in are circumstances that any one of us could have experienced, through the grace of God. Certainly, we haven't, but nonetheless, I think it's given us a different perspective on people's struggles and understanding their struggles better, and asking ourselves, how can we help them get through those struggles?
Yeah, and that's why my hat goes off to you guys so much, right? Because you not only, again, are great fathers and grandfathers, right? But you're wrapping your arms around these young men that have experienced so much, while at the same time maintaining your own sense of sanity, right? So, again, man, I salute you guys, and I love you guys. As we wind down, though, I do have one last question, because, again, right, when we talk about everything that you do and maintaining your own family, there's also the importance of maintaining yourself, right? Maintaining both your mental and your physical health. And it's critical so that we can be the best that we can be for our families, right? So the question I have for you guys is, what do each of you do to unwind for yourself to maintain the mental health that you need? And why is it important for us brothers to make sure that we get regular visits to our doctors?
Like the old guy can start, because you guys got a couple of years on me before you and I think what has come to me at again almost 74 and changing health considerations is we have to develop a discussion of what's necessary for health and wellness individually. Okay. We have to develop a discussion that says, I'm important too. You know, you can't be somebody's dad or husband or whatever if you're sick in the hospital. You can't be somebody's dad or be there when they need you if you're always tired and falling asleep, or if you're not taking care of yourself. You can't your children and your family about the importance of health and wellness if you're not observing it yourself, and they have to be able to see you observing it. So my discussion becomes, you have to realize where you are. And I used to, when I was in the cadets, we used to have a saying that one of the guys that taught the junior leadership class, remember, you're always on stage. And he'd say, you junior leaders, you leaders, remember, you're always on stage because somebody sees you. And he used to carry it and say, well, remember, when you might think that our young people, they're like role models, they like to see you, but they're always seeing you. You don't know necessarily when they're gonna see you. So you have to always act like, when I step out the house, I'm on stage and somebody sees me, and lead your life accordingly. I think what happens, no disrespect, we get caught up in, my mom used to say, putting food in your tummy and a roof over your head and clothes on your back. And for many people, because that's become such a difficult thing to do, they are singularly focused on that, okay? I've had parents say to me, well, I'm working every day. I'm putting food in his stomach and clothes on his back and a roof over his head. What else you want me to do? The answer is, whatever it takes to maintain that bond between you and your children and your family. They will do what they see you do. And if they see you in a healthy environment, you know, you take time to cook dinner, or you tell me to go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, because you don't have time, you're tired, okay? I really wanted you to go to that meeting with me, or that game. Oh man, I just got home, I'm tired, okay? You know that you shouldn't have whatever that is you got there and putting all that salt on it. So how you telling me what to do, okay? We are role models for our children, and as Barkley said, I hate that word, that discussion, but it's true. We are our parents' children. And likewise, they're our children. So we have to always, we don't have the luxury of days off, if you want to put it that way. Parent on 24/7. So I think we need to be aware of that in health. What do we eat? Do we exercise? How often do we visit a doctor? Because you know as well as I do, my mom and dad, they're old school. They went to the doctor when they were sick. They ain't nothing about no periodic checkups. They say, I ain't got that kind of money. They was afraid to go there anyway, right? So when you start talking about those things that you need to do, health and wellness, what you eat, exercise, where you go, how you purport yourself, all right? Those are the things we have to continue to do on a 24/7 basis, because we're always on stage as parents. There's no off time when you think your kid, well, they ain't see that. They ain't see that. They don't know I did that. Yes, they do. Okay? And they pay it, they may not mention it, but they watch you and they watch how you operate. And they know when you walk the walk and talk the talk, and they know when, what your father used to tell you, this gonna hurt me more than it hurts you. And in your mind you go, that's a lie. That's a lie, right? You know, you gonna make me whip you. What are you talking about? That's all I got.
Brothers, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely think, you know, with self-awareness, right, you got to certainly use your self-awareness to figure out what it takes to keep you mentally going. Being fully transparent, in the beginning of the, you know, once COVID hit, school shut down, a lot of my business, my personal business shut down and slowed down, you know, a lot. So you're sitting down there and you're thinking, how am I going to balance the finances, right, while I'm still, you know, still trying to build the business, but still trying to keep safe and all of these things. And that became, you know, very difficult. I found myself gaining weight because I was just home. Like, I don't know what to do, but I found M&Ms to be really good. And M&Ms, not the bite-sized candy, right? That's not what I'm talking about, right? Although that was part of it as well. But the M&Ms I'm talking about for me personally was music and maintenance, M&Ms, right? So one, I found myself, I went through a couple things in my life when I was younger, living in the islands, right? Hurricanes, Hurricane Hugo, Hurricane Marilyn. Those were big hurricanes in the islands, devastate islands. And I remember during those times, right, it was crisis mode. I remember we wouldn't have any lights on in the house. We would only be walking around with candles, and I would be waiting until the morning so that I could see some sunlight. So what happens is, what got me through that time when I was younger was music. I used to listen to these artists, and we used to play music, you know, play whatever we had, the CDs we had, we had cassette tapes at the time. We would listen to that over and over and over, and that really got me through that time. So even now, I found myself reverting back to just listening to music at times to just kind of clear my head. But then you also need maintenance, and that maintenance needs a mental maintenance. And what I found is that I'm a person who's very much out there, like amongst audiences. And when I don't have that, and you have me in solitude, it feels like solitary confinement in some ways, right? So what I have to do is figure out how could I maintain myself weekly. And what I did is I just reached out to some of the brothers who I know personally, and I say, guys, we're all going through this storm, right? And I know you guys are dealing with it the way you're dealing with it. I'm dealing with it the way I'm dealing with it. But why don't we open up a space where we could connect? So every Monday night, we do a Monday mental maintenance for men. And what we do is we get on the call, and it's the brothers come around, and everybody, you know, people are eating, they're comfortable, but we're just talking about issues and just kind of keeping that bond. So really, that's become like a therapy session for me, to be able to hear the views of the brothers and what they're feeling at this time, and then also hear some of the strategies that they're using. So here's another form of M&Ms we're giving out even on that call. Brothers are sharing what methods that they're using that's effective in this time, and then the mistakes that we need to avoid. Right? So methods and mistakes have been really good, and we're getting it through that weekly Monday mental maintenance call. It's a checkup for our mind, and that's been helpful. So music and maintenance has really been helpful during this time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, brothers. We are at the end of our time. I almost feel like we could keep going. This has been such a rich conversation. Want to thank you so much again for your time. Brother Harris, Colonel Kairson, Brother Browne, I love you guys. You know, we've been associated for a number of years, man, and I appreciate all of the efforts that you put in. Like I said, not only for your own children, but for the young men that we have all committed our lives to serving. You know, as I close out, just want to give a big shout out again to my children, Jakari and Sierra. Love you guys. Again, they made my Father's Day as special as they could. You know, it's interesting that they're slowly lifting the lockdown. So, you know, hopefully we can get out and start doing some stuff again. So I just wanted to shout those guys out and let them know how much I love them. But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us on this 8th installment. Next week is our 9th and final installment of the Virtual Village, where we will have on as guest members of the Eagle Academy Foundation Junior Board. So that should be very fantastic. That'll be next Tuesday at 7 p.m. So again, brothers, thank you so much. Thank you so much again, audience, for joining us. Again, happy Father's Day to all of the dads out there, all of the father figures, all of the mentors. Happy Juneteenth. Again, I hope everybody went out there and celebrated that to the fullest extent. And again, thank you so much, Eagle family. Love you. Have a great night. Take care.
Love you too, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
So tomorrow, Aaron,